People are divided on this topic, so we want to tackle head on whether or not ADHD is a superpower or if it is a curse. Cass, what are your thoughts?
I think it can easily be a bit of both. My perspective on this is I don't necessarily think people have a problem with the concept of what we're talking about. I think it's the terminology.
I agree with you. And this is Fuck the Plan, the ADHD Project podcast. So it's no secret that people with ADHD think differently, right? Like some of us see this as a blessing and they're able to harness that sort of like hyper focus and some of those um, I guess ways of working that oftentimes neurotypical folks don't have or access to. But then at the same time, some people see it as only negative. It's pretty debilitating as a condition if you think about it when it comes to day life.
It is. And with anything, I think when you get that first diagnosis, it's so easy to go into like doom mode.
Right.
It's so easy to be like, oh my God, now my life is over. I have this thing that I'm going to have to take medication for, and I need accommodations and blah, blah, blah. But really, you've been living with it your whole life already.
Yeah.
Now you just have a name for it.
And what's cool about having a name for it is now you realize that a lot of these things aren't your fault. And so that was my experience getting diagnosed is I had spent, 30 years of my life thinking that I was just a shitty human. Like I couldn't do things the right way.
Yeah, we all think we're stupid or something
Exactly.
like that, and we're not.
And you spend your whole life being told, you're so smart. Why can't you just apply yourself, which is something that we'll talk about in one of our other episodes. But, you start to think that it's a personal failing. And when you get a diagnosis, you realize that, hey, there's something that this can be attributed to. It's not a character flaw that I can't visualize time. It's the way that my brain works or doesn't work for that matter.
And look, it's very easy to take it personally. I mean, what is more personal than being told that your brain isn't wired correctly?
Right.
Or correctly in quotes.
Quote unquote.
But it's, there are positives and there are negatives to everything.
Yeah.
And before you go down that little doom spiral of thinking that there's something just, so wrong with you and it's only going to impact you negatively, that's not necessarily the case. And we don't want to take that superpower terminology and make light of it because
Right.
I understand that that's why a lot of people have problems with it.
Yeah.
And it gets applied to many different disorders. I mean, as somebody with bipolar disorder, it gets applied to that as well.
Yeah. I'm a little surprised that it gets applied to bipolar disorder too, but like that's kind of a good comparison because I know it's obviously they're two very different things, but
And it's a spectrum.
It
There are
is a
some
spectrum.
that are more debilitating than others.
but you also see this sort of dichotomy with ADHD where you have these really high highs and really low lows. And it's no surprise to me that it's comorbid with bipolar so many times. And I don't think the point of what we're getting at today is to make a determination on whether it is a strength
No.
or a detractor, because I don't necessarily know that you can. So we want to lay out our experiences with it. And we want to talk about a few examples that we've seen, both with successful people and in pop culture, and kind of let you decide for yourself where you land on it. And it will likely be a spectrum, I think.
Yeah, just like everything else.
Yeah.
And if somebody can walk away after listening to or watching this, and somebody who may be having trouble talking about the fact that they have ADHD, somebody who's still a little ashamed of it, somebody who has had trouble getting help, if somebody can listen to this and walk away with it doesn't have to be all bad, then I will consider this episode a success. If just one person can walk away and say that.
Absolutely, yeah. Because my experience is not that it's all bad in a lot of ways. So I had Cass written down first on the outline, but I guess I'll just kind of jump into it. So my personal experience with whether my ADHD has been a strength or has been a negative has really been a pretty 50-50 balancing act in my life. I will say that once I realized I had it, it made it a lot easier to work with it in a way. But there are certain examples I can point to. So, for example, I have this ability to kind of hyper focus and really get a lot of work done in a short period of time. Unfortunately, that comes at the expense of working at a normal pace like a regular office employee is expected to do. So my workday generally looks a lot different than most other people's. Whereas a lot of folks kind of go one task at a time, one after the other. You work steadily for the first half of the day. You take your lunch or a smoke break if you smoke or whatever, and then you finish the rest. My workday is characterized by like half hour or hour chunks of furiously doing an absurd, inhuman amount of work that no other employee would ever be able to do in 1 hour, followed by having to recover for 2 or 3 hours and do silly online e-trainings because I can't think about working anymore. Now, at the end of the day, does it get done? Yes. But is it a superpower? I don't know that it is. I ask generally at work for my results to be judged based on the results of my work rather than the pace and structure of the behaviors, which is opposite from what a lot of businesses are doing nowadays. I also have the ability to, in some cases, get up early in the morning and work for myself because I have this determination to work at a certain period of the day. For me, 16-year-old me would be uh, shocked, I think, that this is about to come out of my mouth. But like very early in the morning is a really good time for me to work because I'm uninterrupted and I can put on music and just knock out work for the ADHD project for a few hours. And then at the same time, sometimes my wife will look me dead in the face and say something, and I'll turn around and it's gone out of my brain. So, like, there are lots of things that I've had to learn and compensate for. But what I will say is that is not quite as debilitating as it was before now that I know what I'm working with and I'm able to kind of counteract and find ways of compensating for some of that. So is it negative in a lot of ways? Yeah, there's things that I really wish I didn't have to deal with. The forgetfulness is one of them, of course, but also it's so difficult to visualize time passing because we literally can't. So I have a hard time with timing of things. And for a person who's continuously anxious that they're going to be late because of who I am as a person, that sucks. And that really stresses me out. Like today, I was so stressed because I had stuff I needed to get done by the time we got here to, 5 whatever PM to record this podcast. And in the middle of the day, I was like, I don't think I'm going to be in the right mindset to record a podcast tonight because I'm so stressed right now. But I was able to figure it out. So I'm going to kind of put a pin in my experience for now because I talked a little bit about some of the strengths and some of the things that have bugged me. And I want to hear about some of your experiences with it, Cass, some of your strengths and weaknesses.
Well, it's funny because I actually also had a super stressful, like, bad mental health day and was like, man, I don't know if I can like get on this mic and not sound like you are today, but
Hey, I'm here for it. If we want to have a depressive episode, we can do that. If I could at least get them depressed, then I've done my job.
want to feel worse? Listen to this. But there's a bit from what you were saying. There's a bit of a chicken and the egg aspect. Like, yes, it's great to work in those bursts and get 12 hours of work done in 3.
Yeah.
But if you weren't procrastinating and you didn't have trouble focusing, you probably wouldn't need to do that.
Right.
And the same thing goes with. Perfect example. I literally just forgot what I was about to say. There's nothing positive about that, I will say.
No, that really sucks when that happens. Yeah.
Except like my partner can tell me stories over and over again because I may have forgotten it.
Yes.
And so he probably thinks he's hilarious because of that.
I mean, he probably is pretty funny, I guess. If he's going to be dating you, you've got to have some kind of a sense of humor, especially if he's planning on being with you for the rest of his life.
That's true.
He's going to have to figure it out.
That in itself is a joke. Not his decision. I don't know.
I was going to say, is it as much of a joke or more or less than the rest of your dating history?
Less.
Wow. Shots fired a little bit, but that's all good.
But the point is, everything can be looked at as light or dark in this situation. And sure, some of these superpowers might not even be necessary if the negative things weren't there.
Right.
But there are aspects that don't necessarily follow that rule.
Yeah.
There was a study that I found that is on the National Library of Medicine. And we will post this link in the video or somewhere on the website or something if anybody wants to look at the actual full study. It's way too long to get into on here, but it is a very good read and it hammers home what we're talking about in a much more scientific, logical way if that's more your speed.
We're not about science and logic here.
No, we are absolutely not. We're about jokes. So this was a study that was done at the end of 2020. And I believe it was in Norway because, I mean, God knows the U.S. wouldn't fund
Gotta
this.
love Norway. Shout out to Norway for being fucking awesome. If the
Shout
whole,
out to Scandinavia
I know,
in general.
if the whole of Scandinavia wants to come on this podcast, then you are more than invited. Please come on down.
Please do. You guys have it figured out.
I know.
But they did a whole study of adults. Again, as we talked about in a previous episode, so many ADHD studies focus only on children.
Right.
This was all adults, and it was specifically to figure out positives of ADHD.
Oh, that's cool.
And it was a pretty united front. Like, all of the positive traits that they were examining and that people openly talked about, they were so similar between all of the test subjects. And one of them was emotional intensity, which you can argue that that's a bad thing. And in some respects, it absolutely is.
Certainly.
But in other respects, passion in itself is not a bad thing.
No.
It's the way you use it.
That's true.
And if you're passionate about a project like the ADHD project, it will give you a more entrepreneurial spirit, and it will give you this motivation that, like, you can go to business school and you can learn how, like, logically the steps to open a business. And you can leave that with a degree and say, well, this is what I'm going to do, and then never have the passion to follow up on it.
Right.
That passion and that motivation is something that cannot be taught.
No.
And this emotional intensity and this passion and this drive that kind of comes with ADHD helped you do what you've done and what you are doing.
Yeah. And you know what I find is that emotional intensity in a lot of people in a lot of people that translates as empathy, you know? And I find myself personally and a lot of folks that I know with ADHD are extremely empathetic and always strive to try and help other people, because a lot of times we feel like we want to be the help that we never got when we were children, you know? And that leads to just more genuine, empathetic human connection, which is not ever a bad thing in this world. Now, are there times where, you know, maybe the Adderall happens to be wearing off right at the same time the coffee is wearing off, and I'm miserable driving into traffic on my way home and I want to punch my car window? Yes, absolutely. If you ask anybody in the world who knows me personally, they will say I am not an angry dude.
Not at all.
But between when I was taking Adderall before I had the Vyvanse, between 5:30 and 6:30 p.m., I would go into like fucking gremlin mode and just be an awful person to be around. And that was one of the big reasons I switched from Adderall, is because of that sort of awful crash that I had. So the emotions can be intense and they can be there, but that doesn't preclude you from being able to manage them either.
Right.
So like, I also think that the emotional intensity of that has both sides too.
It definitely does. In the case of having that passion and motivation for like different projects, that I would have trouble looking at that from a negative standpoint.
Right.
But sure, intensity is a big scope.
That's true. And what if, you know, passion is sort of manifesting itself not so much as passion, but as a fixation on something negative.
Yes.
So I could see that being a
absolutely.
negative, you know, like being addicted to drugs. Like, you know, that's obviously an extreme example, but
I did read that there is a predisposition for addiction in people with ADHD.
And that makes sense.
Which is very real. But so more of these characteristics that were reported by almost the entire study group. Creativity. They break this. This is a chart that if you follow the link, you'll find. And there are 4 different headings. The dual impact of ADHD characteristics, which includes energy and feeling more energetic. It talks about the hyperfocus and attention that we just talked about.
Right. And
spontaneity, which again is something that could be good or bad.
Right.
It certainly makes you fun. It opens you up to new experiences, makes you do things that other people might be too afraid to do. But I don't even think I have to get into the negative side to explain why that could be a bad thing.
I mean, that comes back to bite you in the ass sometimes.
Yes.
And like, I feel like I feel like I said like too many times just now, but I feel like that's one of those things that as you get older, you kind of learn your limits and boundaries of that. But it's not something that is just innate. Like you have to consciously do that. And that's like another thing
Mhm.
that, kind of goes hand in hand with some of that is that we have to consciously manage a lot of these things a lot more than neurotypical folks do because they're born with those guardrails and we
Right.
are not.
And one of the things that we were saying before we started going is when we say superpower in this context, what I think of is X-Men.
Right.
The world of the X-Men shows very clearly the negative side to having superpowers.
Oh, yeah.
It's not Superman who can just do anything and he's fantastic and positive and
Right.
wonderful. Like, some of these powers are like if you touch someone, they die.
Yeah.
That's not good.
It's not fun.
No.
No.
And the whole thing about the X-Men, facing this social discrimination is because yes, some of their powers are not just they are actively destructive.
Yeah.
But, they go into this community where they're not alone, which piggybacking off of how it's sometimes good to have a label.
Yeah.
One of the most wonderful things about having a label or a diagnosis is the knowledge that you're not alone.
Right.
So many people are going through exactly what you're going through that they had to put a name on it.
Yeah.
And that's very comforting.
Right. In a way, it's like you're not special, which is fucking great. I
Yeah.
am thankful that I am not special because if I was the only one dealing with this shit, Mike, I don't know what I would do, you know?
Yep. You'd go insane.
Exactly.
And so, the X-Men get together and they learn how to harness these abilities. And some of them choose to use them for evil. Some of them choose to use them for good. Some of them are firmly in the middle and they're that chaotic neutral that I
Yeah.
love so much.
That's kind of like my vibe.
Exactly. And, but ultimately, they are given the tools to manage it. And it is a daily struggle. And some people have powers that are way cooler unless, you touch someone, they die.
Right.
So that is also a spectrum.
Yeah.
But it very clearly shows the negative and positive sides of being gifted or burdened with, however you want to look at it,
Right.
an unusual ability.
And I think one of the important things and themes that you see in X-Men is they're trying to gain acceptance
Mhm.
from the external world. And a lot of times the moral of the story ends up being you need acceptance for yourself
Yes.
before you can find acceptance from the external world. And I think that having a label of ADHD is good to attribute things to, but I don't necessarily believe that we need to label it as good or bad because I think it's just what it is. You've never known any different. This is how your brain works. And now that you know the score, you can play the game and you can figure out how to use the different parts of it to your advantage and how to help curb some of the negative effects of it.
And look, there are actions you can take that may be fueled by symptoms that could be good or bad.
Right.
But in general, the diagnosis itself is not one way or another. And I believe that the same can be said of people at large. I don't necessarily think people in general are good or bad. I think people are.
Yeah.
And the choices they make can be good or bad.
Right.
There are some outliers.
Yeah. Sociopaths and whatnot.
Yeah,
but,
well, I was thinking about Dave Grohl. Honestly, I've never read a bad thing about Dave Grohl, and I hope he's doing all right today.
I really do hope Dave Grohl is okay.
Yeah.
And you know what? This is a good story about acceptance because when I was a teenager, I was the biggest Nirvana fan in the whole entire world. And then obviously coming into the real world, yeah, I was born in 91, by the way. So like Nirvana was still fresh. Kurt Cobain was still like just passed
Were
away.
you the baby on the Nevermind cover?
I kind of wish I was, but no. But for the longest time as a teenager, I was so pissed off at Dave Grohl for not like doing something with Nirvana. And like, it was so irrational. There was no reason for it. Right. And then as I get older, I realized like, hey, he's doing some good things. Like, if I put myself in Dave Grohl's shoes, like, what would I expect to do? Is he just going to pack it up and quit being a musician because
And,
of Nirvana?
weirdly enough, that piggybacks into another fantastic category here. Dave Grohl, I love
Yeah.
the man. I could talk about him forever. I'm not going to, but I will tie him into this. he was in Nirvana. He was terrified to show Kurt the songs that he was writing because he didn't think they were good enough.
Right.
And he was young as they started getting bigger than any of them expected to, and bigger than Kurt even wanted to,
Right.
which was part of the whole downfall.
Oh, yeah.
And then Kurt, not only his bandmate, but one of his best friends, kills himself.
Right.
And obviously that is a traumatic event right there. It made Chris Novoselic, the bassist, stop. He went and started farming, and then he went into politics.
That's a weird jump. But,
weird jump.
All right.
And instead of doing that, he said, here's all the songs I was too afraid to show Kurt. I'm going to try and do something with this. And then you fast forward to, I think it was 2022, when Taylor Hawkins, the drummer of the Foo Fighters, who was actually Dave Grohl's best friend, died. And that's twice that's happened.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many of us would be like, I'm going to continue with music.
Yeah.
This dude is still doing what he does.
Yeah.
He's still doing what he loves. The resilience in that mentality is so admirable.
For real.
And resilience is one of the things listed from this study.
Yeah, we have a short memory when it comes to
Everything.
good things and bad things. That could be a good thing too. So like, I don't know why I never put this together, but like, talking about acceptance, like Dave Grohl was strong enough to accept himself and what he had put together and continue on. I, as a young adult, was strong enough to accept that Dave Grohl is fucking good at what he does. And I shouldn't hate on him anymore because Nirvana doesn't exist. And we all have the ability to have a short memory when it comes to bad things. So there have been traumas in my life, and I'm sure in your life, that I'm thankful aren't as big of a part of my memory anymore.
Yes.
Things that I have gone through that I've learned from, of course, but also that I have been able to grow from and not let that stress and that trauma stick with me and only take the good things because of that bad memory, sort of gene that we have in a way.
In that subcategory, they were listing kind of things that go along with resilience, which is accepting intolerance and having unique insight and being warm and empathetic, as we touched upon a few minutes ago. And I think that the reason we are so resilient is because we think so damn fast.
Yes.
Every time, when I think of like ADHD hyperfixation, in the BBC Sherlock,
right,
when all the equations just pop up around him and he makes like a call like that.
Right.
That's how I imagine it. And because just like anybody who has an unconventional thought process, you kind of have to learn not necessarily to assimilate, but do something like that in order to get by in the real world.
Right.
And to do that, you have to be very observant.
Mm-hmm.
You have to be observant. You have to be personable enough to maybe ask questions as to why things are done the way they're done.
Right.
And it does make you exceptionally good with people when handled a certain way. And obviously, certain personalities have predispositions to things. People are more introverted than others. But as a whole, having such an active mind and having to navigate a world that, quite frankly, isn't built for you, makes you think about things so much more, and it makes you feel things so much more.
Yeah.
And it's almost like that emotional processing. We can't always do it, and sometimes it's out of our control, but sometimes it's like we can hit fast forward.
Yeah.
And we can process and try to move on a little faster than some other people.
Yeah. Now, there's a positive and a negative to all that, right? So I am what my therapist would call an intellectualizer, where I will take these things and I will think about them so hard that I've moved past them in my brain, but I haven't actually processed the feelings of it.
Therapist gets mad at me for that too.
High five. Yeah, I don't know if I'd say she gets mad, but that was a big eye-opener for me, is to realize like, hey, you can't just think about things hard enough and they'll go away. You have to actually process the feelings behind them too.
Yep. And I think it's easy, especially with ADHD, to break it down in an intellectual sense.
Right.
Facts make sense.
Yeah.
Motivations, once you figure them out, can make sense. You're like, I know that this is why it happened, and I should feel this way. I should think this way. This makes complete sense. And that's great. And sometimes that can help you de-escalate
Right.
like a raw reaction you're having. And you can be like, calm down. I understand their point of view. Let's logic this out.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily stop you from feeling it.
No.
It
And
just it might make you react better, but it's not going to stop you from feeling it. And you can't make that go away.
no, and you can't just push them down there. And I didn't always realize how that was coming out. So like I would kind of intellectualize these things and make sense of it in my brain and then say, all right, cool, I can move on from that. But then it would come out as stress. It would come out in my body.
Mhm.
I'd have some weird knot in my shoulder that I never had before, or like I would be miserable and I'd be like, why am I so pissed off right now for no reason? It was like, oh, well, probably because I didn't process all of the emotions that I'm feeling at the moment. But like, it's a learning process, right? You know, now that I've learned that I do that, you can start to practice getting better at that kind of thing. So, you know, I think that it's another thing that is not necessarily good or bad, but that there's a balance and that you have to learn how to work within the constraints of that, you know?
Exactly.
If we have too many choices on how to handle things, then it kind of exists in this amorphous amoeba, you know, sort of ethereal space, and you can't make sense of it. But if you can put some constraints on it, think about things logically, get an idea of the timeline of events and whatnot, you can make sense of it enough to where you can say, now I know how I need to process these emotions, rather than just like getting the feed of raw emotions and having to react. You know, you can stop and think about it and say, all right, well, this is probably the right answer. Now, how am I feeling about that? Let's work through that, you
Yep.
know?
And, the entire point of this podcast is to motivate and instruct and empathize about creating a life that you love.
Right.
That was the very original concept of this podcast. And some of these traits might be neutral in the grand scheme of things, but if you can actually put yourself in an environment in which you thrive, then they become positive or negative.
Right.
For instance, the finance job.
Right.
It was straight up negative for me
Yeah.
because I didn't care. I didn't give a shit. So that emotional intensity that could cause like positive passion, that fire was dead, man. There was no fire.
It turns it into extreme apathy, you know,
Yeah.
way more apathy than your average bear, you know?
Mm-hmm. And it's not, so that is an active negative.
Right.
But this Amazon delivery job, I don't think I could do this job without ADHD. It is, and I will say, Amazon is an evil empire, and I am a little bit ashamed that I have to deliver for them.
So now we have to see if we can get Dave Grohl and Jeff Bezos on the same podcast episode with us. And
Oh,
we'll
I have
them
some
duke it
choice
out.
words. Oh, damn. I was actually wearing the guillotine necklace earlier. I think I switched it out because this goes better with the earrings. But with that job, you are in constant motion.
Yeah.
And I have 100, and the average thing at this news station that I'm at is about 180 to 190 stops per day.
Yeah.
And that takes a while because it's not a USPS mail route.
Right.
Your stops aren't just one house after another.
Yeah, it's like random.
It's random. And some of these people live in really weird situations. And some of these people password protect deliveries. That's a thing you can do now. Please don't do it. It annoys us. And so it's time consuming, but you are in constant motion. I think my Fitbit, the highest, the most strenuous day I had is I walked 16 and a half miles in one shift.
Cass, are you trying to fill up all of your days with activity so you don't have to be alone with your own thoughts?
Exactly. And that is why ADHD is so good.
That's the only thing I like about going to
this.
the gym is that I am only thinking about how much I don't want to be doing what I'm doing, and I can't actually think about, the other stressful things on my brain.
What did Chris Traeger say in Parks and Rec? He's like, if I keep my body and mind moving at all times, I can stop myself from falling into a pit of despair.
Yes, a pit of despair.
But not even just in the distraction sense. It's when you have ADHD, you do want to constantly be moving. You don't like downtime.
Yeah.
And when you're driving, when you're lifting these totes that are about 60 pounds, when you're walking, when you're trying to figure out like, oh, is that dog going to kill me or does it want pets? Like while you're doing this, there is no downtime.
Right.
And if I didn't have this and I would want to take a lunch break or I would want to relax, I don't know if I'd be able to get it all done.
Yeah.
So it really depends on the environment you're putting yourself in. And if you can craft a career space or a social circle or a hobby that plays off of some of these symptoms,
Yeah.
that's a way of making it positive.
And that's a great segue, because one of the themes that we wanted to get across in this episode in particular is that what we really want to strive for is acceptance of yourself, not making a judgment about it being good or bad. And so a lot of times I feel like, well, if I can't change me, if I can't change how my brain is, what can I change about my environment to make it work in a way that is more aligned with how my brain works? It's the idea of, it's the idea of basically, if I can't make the world be more like me, how can I make my immediate environment be more conducive to me
Mhm,
being successful in this world? I can't be like the neurotypicals, and I'm never going to change the whole of society.
mhm.
But how can I work within that system, around and against that system, to get some sort of a conducive environment for myself?
Exactly. And in a way that doesn't make you wear a mask
Yeah.
because it's exhausting.
Yeah.
I like to act on stage. I don't want to do it when I'm off stage.
No, no, that's
It's
the
so
whole idea.
tiring.
One of the things that Marissa had said to me in our well, we wrote these notes to each other on the day before we got married, and
Oh,
in these little cards, and it was really, really sweet. And I can't share all of it or I'll start crying because I'm a big emotional sap. But
baby.
one of the things that she said to me is that I am unapologetically me, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And that is something that I had to work at. And for a long time, I put on this mask of trying to be someone else, trying to be what society and everybody wants you to be. And one day, I had enough. And I said, fuck this. I am not doing this shit anymore. And I started to just be me, whether you like it or not.
Hmm.
And that has made all of the difference in my life. Does everybody else accept me? Absolutely not. But am I willing to piss the people off who deserve to be pissed off by not accepting me?
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah, absolutely. I'm willing to live with the consequences of being me because it's the only way that I can exist anymore. To borrow or paraphrase from one of my favorite social media people, Gary Vee, is that like this dude swears all the time, and it's great because he's like the head of a huge marketing company, and he'll be on TikTok saying, "Oh, fuck this and that," and like he'll be turned down for like $20,000 speaking events because he refuses not
Mhm.
to swear. And he's always saying, I can only do this if I am going to be me. And I am willing to turn down and lose out on the opportunities that I might lose out on by being me because that's more worth it to me than having to be someone else. And I really want everybody to think about, who are you really? Do you need to spend some time to think about that and to work on that and to remove this mask? And who knows, maybe call a therapist. I can't tell you exactly how to do that. I'm not even always there myself, but to do that, you have to accept who you are as you are,
Good and bad.
and
Yeah.
everywhere in between the spectrum.
Yeah, self-acceptance doesn't mean I am perfect.
No.
No, you have to accept the good and the bad about you.
Yeah.
There are things about me that I don't like that I know I need to work on, and I try, but I know myself well enough to know that it's something I need to work on.
Yeah. And there's no one big answer to that. There's
Mhm.
no like, check this box and your life is better.
Oh, I wish there was.
Oh my God. But this is a practice and a process. And when I say accept yourself, it doesn't mean you just do it one time and
Mm-mm.
that's it. Every day is a practice in reminding myself that it's okay to be the way that I am, and that the people who love me and care about me will still be that way and they will still accept me. And you cannot live with the stress of wondering whether or not people actually accept you and love you for who you are, or if it's this mask you're putting on.
Yep. And if you are inauthentic, people will notice. You might be able to get by for a while, but it's only a matter of time before people start picking up, hey, this person's full of shit.
Yeah.
And maybe it's less callous than that, what they
Right,
say,
right.
but it is noticeable. And charisma or, stage presence, or even just the ability to go out and chat with somebody at a bar
Yeah.
or make a new friend, that only works if you're authentic.
Yeah.
What people are drawn to is being unapologetically yourself. There
Right.
are so many people that are copy pasted versions of what they think other people want. It's not interesting.
No.
People are drawn to people who are disarmingly honest.
Yes.
And it is a skill.
Yeah.
It's not something you're just going to be able to do.
And this isn't to chastise anyone who is
No,
living
totally opposite.
with masking and who is dealing with that, because let's be honest, this is something that we had ingrained in us from childhood,
Mhm.
that we have to act and be a certain way, and it takes a very long time to unmask and grow out of that.
What a fitting topic for Pride Month.
Oh my
by the
God. I
way.
know, it's fantastic. But being able to do that requires a certain level of self reflection. And I'm not saying that you're bad and wrong if you're masking. What I'm saying is you owe it to yourself to let who you really are out. And you might say, well, what if people don't like me anymore? 2 words: fuck them.
Yep.
That's really it. And it's that simple. And I know that's a really difficult thing to come to terms with, because there might be people that you really don't want to not be in your life anymore. And you might be stressed out about that. And that's totally real and valid. But what I'm telling you is that if you unmask and these people have an issue with you or how you are, that's not somebody that was worth having around in the
Mhm.
first place. And by have an issue, I don't mean like, maybe hang out a little bit less. What I mean is that they now have a problem with you because you are being your authentic self. I'm not talking about something casual. I'm talking about somebody being a dick.
Yeah. Yes. And that's not to say you can't mourn the loss.
No.
It's totally valid to do so.
And you
but-
should. You got to process that emotion, right? Don't
Mhm.
intellectualize it. Process it.
And that's it's really only hurting yourself.
Right.
And that is another negative of some of those positive-ish traits we were talking about.
Yeah.
That ability to see through people, to empathize, to overthink to the point of like picking out these little things that can make us resilient or that can make us process things faster. They can be what teaches you how to mask.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's subconscious. Sometimes you don't realize you're doing it.
Right. And neurotypicals are also masking in a lot of ways.
A lot of times more so.
Sometimes even more so.
Or they're more conscious of it
Yeah.
anyway.
And so sometimes it can be an advantage to be your authentic self, as opposed to having to mask, because you might be sitting at let me back up 1 second. If you are not being authentic and you're struggling to fit into where you are, then you're probably not being excluded from the table. You're trying to sit at the wrong table. You need to find not only people and places and things and career paths, but just an environment altogether that is one of acceptance. And that starts with you. And there's always that cliche saying that's in every third rom-com movie, but if you don't love yourself, then nobody else can love you. And if you don't know how to accept yourself and be your authentic self, then nobody can really know the real you. And you'll be left wondering, do they really know me? Or is this all just an act? And the stress of that is way more than the stress of unmasking and realizing that, hey, it's okay to be me. And if some people don't like it, then they don't like it.
There's a line from one of my favorite movies, Taking Woodstock, which is
The quote episode. We're doing all quotes, all episode.
this one. This quote always makes me like tear up when
Yeah.
I see it, and I think it's really powerful because it's just so simple. The protagonist is gay, and it's 1969, and his dad is like this super conservative Jewish man.
Nice. I like where this is going.
69, nice. So the person that they hire for security at their hotel happens to be a trans woman. And unexpectedly, the guy's dad becomes like best friends with her.
Yeah.
And he's just sitting back like, well, this isn't the way I thought this would go. And he goes up to her and he says, does my dad know, what you are? And all she says back is, oh, Elliot, I know what I am. That does make it easier on everybody else. And it's funny and glib, but it's also really poignant because, once you know who you are, it's going to make it easier on everybody else.
Absolutely.
There's no games to be played anymore.
No. And people don't realize how much mental effort and energy that takes to keep up appearances, to keep up that game,
Yep.
whether it's with somebody else or with yourself. Just that internal struggle and conversation within your own brain can be debilitating. And until you face that and realize that you're spending all of your energy being somebody that you're not, you'll never be who you actually have the potential to be. And that's not in like a you never live up to your potential ADHD cliche kind of thing.
Right.
That's a there's a person inside of you who has these passions and these feelings and these thoughts, and that person is not being let out. And I don't mean to say that you need to do great things and change the world. Not everybody does, but you have the power to change your own world and you are responsible for it. There's nobody that's going to swoop in and save you. So if you are struggling with this, the answer starts with you. And that's
Mhm.
the true with a lot of things.
And this is going to sound so hokey, but like that is the real superpower here is knowing that you are worth, this sounds dramatic, but knowing that you are worth saving, that knowing that you are worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And that is a real superpower. And you can use some of these symptoms to make that shit happen.
Yeah, and I don't know. I don't think that sounds too dramatic at all because this is your fucking life that we're talking about here.
No one's
Okay?
going to save you. And
Yeah.
no one can help you if you don't feel like you're worth saving.
Yeah, the stakes are that high. You know what I mean? It's the kind of thing where, especially if you're an intellectualizer like me, you kind of try and push some of that away and say like, oh well, I just got to do this or that, and it's going to be okay. Don't worry about it. And then you have weird backaches and stress comes out in other ways in your life, and you start doing dumb stuff and
Oh, yeah.
procrastinating and whatever. But really, I think we've probably driven home enough the point of acceptance is the most important part. Not making a judgment of whether something is always good or always bad, because it's not ever always one or the other.
Mhm.
It's finding a way to work within the system that you've been given. And the sooner that you accept this is the environment that I'm working with, the sooner you can take steps to work within that environment one way or the other.
Yes. And also, like, I will tell you right now, people with ADHD tend to be some of the funniest motherfuckers I have ever met in my life.
We are the vibe leaders at every workplace.
Because we happen to be eccentric.
Yeah.
And like, especially if you have accepted yourself, you're going to
Yeah.
make more jokes at your expense. You make so many jokes about yourself that no one's going to hold it against you. No one's going to ridicule you. You're getting there first.
Exactly. And hey, that could be another superpower, that charisma there. I had a coworker of my wife's at one point said that I make people feel like they've known me forever.
Yes.
And just being able to have other people let their guard down is a byproduct of me having my guards let down. It's not because I'm doing anything special in particular. It's just that I'm very open and honest with myself and how I am and who I am. And there's nobody in the world that I hold back for, except I don't swear in front of my mother-in-law because she doesn't like it and I have respect for her. But outside of that, because we don't have our guards up,
Mhm.
other people feel comfortable letting their guards down. Neurotypical or neurodiverse, it doesn't matter who you are. That's a good thing to put out into the world.
Our old boss literally told me that that's the only reason he didn't fire me.
That's fantastic.
He literally pulled me aside and said, your sales numbers are shit, but you make such a good environment to work in that, it doesn't even matter. And I was like, cool.
I think he's got some issues of his own, but
I think that's definitely true, but it was still cool to hear.
yeah, I wonder how he's doing, but whatever. We only got a couple minutes left, so we won't get off on that tangent here. But we'll have to bring him on at some point.
God.
That's another story for another day. But in closing here, again, I don't think we're going to make a determination, and I don't want to make a determination over whether ADHD is or is not a superpower or whether it's crippling. I think the answer is that it's a thing that you have to deal with, and it's up to you to make the best of what you've been given in life. Some people, even among people with ADHD, we're all so different. Even just Cass and I are very different in a lot of ways. But we have found what parts of this speak to our strengths and what parts don't. And we've learned to focus on the strengths and to counteract the negatives. And I think everybody has to find that balancing act in their own life.
Thinking positively is hard.
It is.
And it's not something, especially now. I mean, everything is a shit show right now. It's hard to think positively. And so you might be sitting there thinking like, well, why? Why should I bother thinking positively? Someone should.
Yeah.
Someone's gotta.
Somebody has to. And if you find yourself saying someone's got to, maybe you should.
Yep.
Maybe you should be the one. But yeah, I mean, I don't I don't think that I could really say one way or another whether I consider my ADHD overall positive or overall negative.
Depends on the day.
Yeah, I mean, there's days like yesterday I feel like I got nothing done. Today, even though it was stress induced, I got a lot done. And it's all about finding over time that flow and working within the balance to take advantage of the good times and capitalize on them so that way you don't have to deal with not getting things done or like not having it happen in the down times.
Right.
So, this has been Fuck the Plan, the ADHD Project podcast. Thank you very much for listening.